So, okay, let's get started. Ladies and gentlemen, dear friends and colleagues, welcome to our roundtable on the forthcoming 5th International Polar Year. This is more than relevant subject to discuss at UNFCCC COP because most of the IPY's endeavors are directly or indirectly about climate and climate change. Besides, COP and IPY are major international undertakings of global character. I would like to congratulate our hosts in Azerbaijan for the excellent arrangements and hospitality. My name is Anton Vasilyev. I'm ambassador, former Russian senior Arctic official. My name is Anton Vasilyev. I'm ambassador, former Russian senior Arctic official, former Russian ambassador to Iceland, and currently vice president of the Russian AGO, Association of Polar Explorers. And I'm also goodwill ambassador of the Northern Forum and advisor to some Russian Arctic universities and think tanks, such as the State Hydrometeorological University. First of all, I'd like to pay tribute to the Northern Forum and its executive director, Vladimir Vasilyev, for their long and hard work on arranging this Arctic Pavilion for the first time in the history of COPs. Bearing in mind that the Arctic is often called the climate kitchen of our planet, it is important that the Arctic agenda play a visible role in our discussions at COP29. I can only hope and wish that this pavilion will be a success here, and I think it is already a success, we can state that, and that it will be an integral part of the future COPs. My gratitude also goes to the esteemed Russian sponsors of this pavilion, Melnichenko Foundation. So allow me to introduce our distinguished panelists today. Sitting next to me is Dr. Alexander Shestakov, Chief Expert, Department of Ecology of Lomonosov Moscow State University Marine Research Center. Online participants today are Dr. Yuri Sychov, Deputy Director General for Scientific Research of Arctic Ugol Company. Dr. Alexey Gunya, Leading Research Fellow, Russian Academy of Science Institute of Geography. And Dr. Andrei Bryksenkov, Moscow Bureau Chief of the Russian State Hydrometeorological University, St. Petersburg. We're also hoping to have here, at least briefly, the rector of the Russian State Hydrometeorological University, Dr. Valery Mikheyev. This is one of the first roundtables on IPY 5 among the Russian experts that I'm aware of. We cannot be too ambitious at this stage. The purpose of our discussion is to reflect on why do we need the next IPY, what are the basic substantial scientific interests in IPY for Russia and Russian research institutions, what is the best way to organize ourselves, who could be our foreign partners and what can we expect from them, what lessons can be drawn from previous IPYs, and what IPY 5 will differ by from IPY 4. How can we coordinate our preparations with our foreign colleagues in the current situation, etc. We have 2 hours at our disposal, and we need to finish strictly by 13 hours local time, or 12 hours Moscow time. So allow me to start with making a very brief introduction on the just mentioned issues. First, what is IPY? International Polar Year is a major international scientific and practical undertaking. It's a big thing. In a nutshell, it's a program of large-scale, consistent, long-term, and globally coordinated climatic, geophysical, social, economic, and other studies of the polar regions. Its purpose is to improve our understanding of ongoing processes and transformations, obtaining significant and reliable data to take science-based political and practical decisions. We already had 4 IPYs in the past. 1882 to 1883, 1932 to 1933, 1957 to 1958. This third IPY was called International Geophysical Year. And the last one was in 2007 to 2008. So we already have a tradition to sustain. Just to remind, within the frame of IPY 4 in 2007-2008, over 800 projects had been implemented, among them about 40 marine and 200 terrestrial expeditions, and over 200 other scientific projects implemented in Arctic Russia. Over 80 Russian institutions, including 8 federal ministries and agencies, associations, foundations, and other, directly participated in IPY 4. A landmark achievement, the legendary dive of Artur Chiringarov's group, when the titanium Russian flag was installed at the geographical North Pole Point at the floor of the Arctic Ocean, was reached in August 2007, exactly within the framework of IPY 4. So for Russia, the key outcomes of IPY 4, inter alia, were modernization of glacial, hydrometeorological, and geophysical monitoring facilities, using outer space, special automated technical means, and ground-based observation system in the Arctic and Antarctic, holding comprehensive high-latitude expeditions in the Arctic and improving effectiveness of the Russian Antarctic expedition, accumulation of a comprehensive and top-quality stock of information on the polar regions of the Earth, modernization of climate and environment monitoring and research based on the system of distributed information resources, development of advanced methods and techniques of analysis and forecasting of processes in the atmosphere, in the ocean, in the water, on the land, and in the near outer space. The results of IPY 4 were reflected in national and international databases, monographs, and research papers, numerous international scientific conferences. In Russia, they have laid ground and contributed to adoption of strategic policy decisions on development of the Arctic zone of the Russian Federation. The IPY 4 success was so big, was so evident, that I remember it very well. We even have an idea of arranging of international polar decade. Why should we limit ourselves to 1 year? Let's make it decade. So that was one of the first emotional outcome of IPY 4. But although this idea turned out premature, the second question is why? Why are we talking about a new IPY, which is expected to happen in 2032, 2033, 7 or 8 years from now, as proposed by the Arctic and Antarctic parliamentarians? I think there are good reasons in favor of these dates. So why are I talking about these dates? 2032, 2033 is exactly 25 years since IPY 4. It's a generation age. The older generation of scientists and researchers will be able to pass on their knowledge and experience to the new one. So we've just discussed it at the previous session here. It looks like climate change is accelerating. We witness new climate records and climate-related disasters more and more often. Just remember recent floods in Spain and recent wildfires in Canada. And we hear that climate change in the polar regions happen even faster than elsewhere compared with what we thought before. This is what we are discussing here at COP29. Now we are living in the midst of the 4th industrial revolution. Our means, tools, and technologies of observation, monitoring, measurement, and analysis have become much more sophisticated than in the beginning of the century, when we had the previous IPY 4. And the technical progress is accelerating two, just think about potential of artificial intelligence or quantum computing, and what could we do with the help of these new things. Just 10 to 20 years ago, one could only dream of what we have now. We have begun a large-scale economic development of the Arctic and its vast natural resources and new strategic sea routes. This is especially true about the Arctic in Russia and the Northern Sea route. There are some important dates here at stake already. And so the Paris Convention will have a target date of 2030, and we shall have to see what will be achieved and what will be missed, and to make the conclusions and to define the targets for a new historical period. These are far from all points in favor of IPY5 in 2032-33. And of course, taking into consideration the current political situation, there is no need to underscore a united, mutually beneficial and positive nature of this undertaking. And the question number three, why we should prepare now, start preparing now? Why we are doing that 7 or 8 years before? The idea of holding IPY5 is being discussed by parliamentarians and international scientific organizations since 2019, for a couple of years already. Russia was approached, and after the interagency considerations has welcomed the idea in principle. Our Arctic neighbors have already started serious preparations and will be organizing initial international conferences early next year, just to kickstart the planning of IPY5. I just heard at one of the sessions here last week that our Norwegian colleagues from AMAP said that the government of Norway has already started the planning of IPY5. But unfortunately, our Western neighbors, they have cut really all contacts with Russian scientists. However, the geopolitical situation is evolving, and we are open for cooperation to the extent that they are ready to do it. We should do our own planning with the view to coordinate our plans in the future when the necessary conditions are ripe. We should not allow a situation where the others will plan everything without us, then come to us and say, sign here. Arctic is our home and our future. Russia is nearly half of the world Arctic, and we bear the special responsibility for the state of affairs in the Arctic. My guess is that IPY5 will by far surpass previous IPYs by scale and depth. We shall have to prepare well in advance in defining our own scientific and practical interests, as well as prepare ourselves to accommodate the interests of our partners. We shall need to prepare financially, meaning both budget and private funding, because IPY will be quite a costly exercise. And we also shall need to prepare our participants, including young scientists, for whom this will be the first experience of this kind, and for whom this will be a serious attractive and stimulus side of their profession. I am sure that much more countries will be involved in the new IPY because the interest in the Arctic and Antarctic is growing for obvious reasons. In IPY4, we had 69 countries, so I think this time it will be much, much more. The scope of IPY5 will inevitably include for the first time the third pole, the so-called third pole, the mountainous areas of the world with glaciers that are melting too. So much more coordination will be required. We shall have to prepare and in a way to enlighten, for example, our colleagues in BRICS. And as we did it previously, it will be instrumental to have the coordinating and leadership roles of the profile international organizations. First of all, of IMO, International Meteorological Organization. I even do not exclude the possibility that IPY5 can become a United Nations IPY. Why not? Not at least the argument in favor of an early start of preparation, of course, is that these preparations by themselves are and will be an important act of cooperation, so needed in today's world. So having said that, let me pass the floor to our distinguished participants. Dr. Yuri Sychov, you were an active participant and organizer of IPY4. How would you assess the results of IPY4 to Russia and for our foreign partners? What are the most important lessons of IPY4 we should bear in mind and take into consideration while preparing IPY5? What was the basis, the root of success of IPY4 that we should keep in IPY5? What should be the sequence of preparation steps to IPY4? Dr. Yuri Sychov, you have the floor, sir.
Thank you, Anton. Thank you, dear colleagues. Could I ask to launch my presentation? If possible, of course. Oh, okay. No, it's not mine. Okay, until we wait the presentations. No, something wrong. Okay, let me read my very carefully prepared presentation.
Until
one moment, we don't hear you.
Ah, okay, wait.
Presentation. Can you check it out? I gave you a permission to share a presentation. Can you check it up?
Sorry?
I gave you a permission.
No. I sent it a couple of days ago to organizer. So that would be nice if you can run on your side. At least I have received the response that everything reached you okay.
Wait a second.
Yes.
Yeah. I will open now.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I opened. Wait a second.
Okay.
Все, вы нас слышите?
Да, конечно. Oh, nice. Okay, dear colleagues, Anton, in his introductory speech, already mentioned at least half of items I would like to mention in my speech, but I will something repeat and maybe some pass. Okay, so what we start with the history. Just we discussed the results of IPY4, and maybe you notice that it was coincided with 50th anniversary of International Geophysical Year and the third IPY. So we are maintaining the tradition of focusing on round dates. Holding the IPY into 2032-33 will allow for a comprehensive study of the change that have occurred over 24 years in the polar regions, which are the kitchen, as we say, and an objective assessment of the results of development of international business communities within the framework of the Paris Agreement on climate change. Let me remind of main stages of IPY. Please, next slide. Oh, okay. First International Polar Year was held in 1982-1983. 10 countries took part in it. Observations were made at 11 stations in the Northern Hemisphere and 2 stations in the subantarctic. Observations were made in the Earth's magnetic field, temperature, atmospheric pressure, relative humidity, and visual observation of cloud and polar lights were also carried out. The organization of the first International Polar Year was the merit of George von Neumayer, Austria, President of International Polar and National Polar Commissions. Next slide, please. The second International Polar Year was held in 1932-1933, just 100 years ago. The scope of observation was significantly reduced due to the global depression that took place during these years. During the second IPY, a number of marine expeditions were carried out in the Arctic seas, and unique data on the ice and ice regime of the Arctic seas were obtained. The second IPY played a major role in the development of the methods for hydrometeorological and ice forecast, and determining the features of hydrometeorological regime in the Arctic, in studies the geomagnetic fields, the propagation of radio waves, etc. The continuation of IPY program was the creation in May 1937 of the first drifting station at the North Pole, which opened an entire era of observation on drifting ice in the Central Arctic. It's generally, next slide, please. Okay, next slide. Thank you. It's generally accepted that third International Polar Year was a part of the International Geophysical Year 1957-1958, when research in the polar region of the Earth reaches an unprecedented scale. During this year, completely new information about an atmosphere, ocean, and glaciation was obtained in the polar region of the Earth. A number of large international projects were initiated to study various components of the environment of the polar region, and the era of space research began. It was the result of the third IPY that led to creation of a system of international data exchange and world data centers in the height of the Cold War. Almost 50 years later, in 2003, Russia came forward with an initiative to conduct large-scale research in the Arctic and Antarctic in the frames of the fourth International Polar Year. This initiative was supported by the World Meteorological Organization at 14th World Meteorological Congress 2003, and by the Executive Council of the International Councils of Scientific Unions in 2004. In 2005, WMO and ICSU established the Joint Organizing Committee of the IPY, and on March 1 of 2007, the official start of International Polar Year was announced at the UNESCO IOC office in Paris. Thus, it took only 6 years to go from the proposal of the initiative to its successful implementation. Fourth IPY was a large-scale international scientific experiment, including scientific events coordinating in time, space, and methodological support for collecting and analyzing factual data of the state of the environment in the key areas of the Earth's polar regions. Within the framework of the 4 IPY, 228 international projects were carried out, in which 50,000 scientists from more than 60 countries took part. During the IPY, many countries significantly expanded their polar research. As a result, new scientific data were obtained, a scientific infrastructure was created, and new modeling and observation technologies were developed. The main legacy of the fourth IPY was important strategic decisions of the development of Russia's activities in high latitude. A large volume of in situ studies of natural environment of the Arctic and Antarctic. Restoration and reorganization of the network of meteorological actinometric and upper air observation and sea level measurement in the Arctic. New data to sustain the other boundary of the continental shelf in the Arctic. The first ever deep sea dive of people to the bottom of the Arctic Ocean at the pole. multidisciplinary information fund of the polar region of the Earth, the basic Arctic observation network, SAON, joint hydrometeorological observatory with NOAA USA in Tixi, multi-volume scientific publication, including 10 tomes, 10 books. Okay. Continuing to conduct observation in the polar region became the scope of the International Polar Decade Initiative proposed by the Russian Federation at the final stage of the IPY. Unlike the IPY, which was one-time campaign, the International Polar Decade was to be a coordinated program implemented over a long period. The need of organize the International Polar Decade was noted in the NOAC Declaration on the occasion of the 7th Ministry Session in the Arctic Council on May 12, 2011. It was approved by a special resolution of the 16th Meteorological Congress in 2011 in Geneva. However, for a number of reasons, this initiative was never implemented. Therefore, today we are again faced with the need for a targeted and systematic study of the polar regions of the planet. Next slide, please. Okay, next. Thank you. Next. And the next. Okay. Okay, and the next. Okay, on the slide you can see the main tasks of the International Polar Decade and why it's so important. I will say a little bit later. Okay, it's not a secret that the polar regions are a natural amplifier of the climate signal. Changes there occur faster, and scale of this change is much larger than the average for the planet. And at the same time, the extremely sparse network of observation in the polar regions does not allow obtaining statistically valid estimates of the climatic signal, which naturally affects the accuracy of the long-term climate forecast. Considering the practical consequences of such forecast, conducting a large-scale international experiment to study the polar region, which is the International Polar Year, seems necessary. Next slide, please. Okay, next. Thank you. Moreover, we're considering it important to take into account the joint proposal of IASC and International Arctic Social Science Association and the University of the Arctic to implement of the International Polar Decade during the 8-year preparation for IPY 5. So it seems to me we can start it very soon. The main feature of Polar Decade could be implemented before the IPY 5 will start it. I would like to know that the preparation and holding of the IPY 5 provides an exceptional opportunity to implement the Arctic Council Agreement of enhancing international Arctic scientific cooperation also. Thus, I propose to organize a board discussion of the initiative to hold the 5th IPY in the scientific and university environment with the involvement of the international organizations such as International Science Committee, WMO, IAC, UNESCO, using the successful experience of organizing false IPY. Next slide, please. And next, please. Okay, so in this regard, I would like to cite the lessons of the fourth IPY formulated by WMO Secretariat when summing up the results. First, coordination of efforts of international organization in preparing a large-scale polar research program should be started as early as possible. Second, creation of a funding mechanism and the policy of funding, management, and data exchange should be among the priority areas in the initial stage of preparation. Third, a new generation of polar researchers should be involved in planning program at the initial stages. Fourth, the committee responsible for overseeing the program of the office program should continue its work for at least 2 years after the official close of the program. I think the conclusions will have great practical applications in the preparation of the 5th IPY, as well as the overall experience of organizing and holding the 4th International Polar Year. I want to answer the questions that Anton asked. Why should we start preparations to the IPY before the 7 years of its starting? Because it's even not enough to do every work to prepare such complicated things like an IPY. So as usual, we are trying to reach the trains that already started. So we need this quick, and we need to work hard to do all the things good. The 4th IPY experience is the basic for such conclusion. Please, next slide. Finally, I would like to take note on the important role of organizing and holding the 4th IPY was played by the outstanding scientist and the polar explorer Artur Chelingarov. He was one of the first to come up with the initiative Hold the 4th IPY, and within the framework of the Russian scientific program, was the first of the world to reach the geographic North Pole at the bottom of the Arctic Ocean on the deep-sea submersible vehicle Mir. In 2021, Dr. Chelingarov proposed to support the initiative of the 14th Conference of Parliamentarians of Arctic Region to hold the 5th IPY in 2032-2033. To our deep regret, he is no longer with us. But holding the 5th IPY will be a worthy testimony of respect and memory to this outstanding person and scientist. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Dr. Suchov. We shall get back to you when we shall have question and answers time. And now let me address Dr. Alexey Gunya. Dr. Gunya, you are a leading expert in Russia in scientific research of mountainous regions. What are your thoughts on the inclusion of the 3rd pole into the scope of IPY 5? What are the commonalities of the 3rd pole with the Arctic and Antarctic? How can inclusion of the 3rd pole in the IPY research plan help to move forward our understanding of the changes at the geographical poles of Earth and vice versa? What countries can and should be our key partners to achieve the necessary synergy? What will be the role of BRICS? What kind of research projects do you envisage in IPY 5? Dr. Gunya, you have the floor.
Thank you very much. Dear colleagues, I'm glad to be here. And during the previous session, it was very interesting idea that the Arctic cannot be considered separately from the rest of the world. Could you give me the permission to share my presentation, please? Yeah. Can you see my screen? I hope. Yeah. Okay. I would like to look at the connection between mountains and the polar regions. There is much in common. These are two of the most unique environments on our planet where natural conditions are similar in many ways and where there are extreme conditions for life. I'd like to focus on 6 topics: mountains and the polar areas, the concept of the 3rd pole, mountain research, mountains of Russia, global changes in mountains, and international cooperation in mountains.
Dr. Gunia, I'm sorry.
Uh,
Spread your presentation. Make a full screen.
yeah. Okay. Do you see now?
The presentation mode.
No, not yet. Just press the button, make it full screen presentation.
I have it, but I don't know why it is not on your screen.
So,
In my
Alexei, do you have it in a slideshow mode?
yes,
Yes. Yeah, click here. Slideshow.
now.
It probably doesn't work for us.
Okay, then maybe I then try to it a moment, just a moment. In again. And no, yeah, it's not again, yeah, okay. Otherwise, we can use my presentation I sent previously.
Maybe you can press the button F5. It's launch a presentation mode on your PC.
Yes, I tried. Mhm. 5, 6, yeah. So no, yeah.
Press F5.
But
Okay, let's not stop here. Let's move on. Dr. Gunia, let's move on. If you can't cope with them.
yeah.
Okay, that's it. That it works. It works now. We have it. Stop here and move on. You pressed the right
Yeah.
button. Oh, no, it's back to normal. Oh, that's right. That's right. We have it. We have it.
This is a presentation I sent, I
Yes,
suppose,
thank you.
yeah?
Thank you.
Okay.
So go on.
Yeah. Okay, then next slide, please. Next slide, please. This is my plan. Yeah, and the next, please. So, I think, yeah, this is my, yeah, okay, yeah. Mountains and polar regions play an important role in regulating the entire global ecosystem, and mountains and polar areas are unique in the terms of nature, biodiversity, cultural characteristics of the local population, development, and so on. And of course, they are very sensitive to human impact, and they are the first to feel climate change. And there is a certain similarity in organization holding, for example, International Polar Years, or also International Year of Mountain Territories. The next, please. Yeah. As you can see from the map, the Earth's cryosphere continues in the mountains. It is a common object of study. Mountain permafrost, colored in red, goes further south, covering large areas. Joint study of polar and mountain regions manifested themselves within the framework of the International Geophysical Year program Dr. Sychov mentioned. In particular, in the Caucasus on Elbrus Mountain, numerous studies of the atmosphere and cryosphere were conducted. Next, please. Mountains occupy, accordingly to various estimates, from 15 to 30% of the land. Mountains areas are the home to almost 15% of the world's population, and half of the world's biodiversity is found in the mountains. The well-being of about half the planet's population depends on the water, food, and energy resources that mountain ranges contain. The next, please. Continents have different average heights. The highest mountain is Antarctica, as you can see from the map, with an average height of 2,400 meters above the sea level. In the picture on the right, we can see a powerful system of ridges which are currently covered with ice. The next, please. The most extensive areas occupied by mountains are typical for Asia. It is the mountains of Asia that form a huge massive of high mountains, which in many ways bear the feature of a polar climate, severe temperatures, winds, permafrost. Here is the highest peak of the Earth and the powerful mountain ranges of the Himalayas, Hindu Kush, Kunlun, Pamir, Tian Shan. Next, please. The concept of the third pole, it is very important now in my context. What is this? First of all, you can see from this map, we can see the Tibetan Plateau is surrounded by mountains ranges. There are more than 100,000 square kilometers of glaciers here. Under the influence of climate change, temperature are increasing, glaciers are melting, snowfall is decreasing. On the other hand, there is accelerating urbanization on the periphery of this macro region. The population is growing, which needs water and energy and so on and so on. The next, please. The role of mountains as a water tower is most obvious in the example of the third pole. In this region, water from mountains meets the needs of almost 2 billion people. Snow contributes to the total flow more than, if you take in account rivers in highland Asia, about 2/3 they give the water from melting for the snow melting. Glacier runoff accounts about up to 12%. The next, please. What about mountains of Russia? The territory of Russia can illustrate the smooth transition of polar regions into mountains and vice versa. Politicians draw more or less clear boundaries. The regions of the far north, so-called far north, left the map on the left, and localities equivalent to regions of the far north pale blue are distinguished. The boundaries of the mountains are submerged in these boundaries. It should be emphasized that the northern problem has a long history. It is institutionalized and even they have also some symbols. The mountain, the mountain theme has not yet, the mountain topic has not yet manifested itself in political decisions. Also, as will be presented further, mountains occupy more than 50% of the country. The next, please. So if you can see from this map, what little attention approaches to the delineation of borders. The basis is the administrative borders and the grounds for delineating the border of the Arctic zone and the territories of the far north. Here we can see that part of the territories located far in the south, like Mountain Altai and Tuva, are included in the regions of the far north. This is due to the fact that these southern regions have high mountains, where living conditions are close to the northern and Arctic. The next. We see that assignment to the polar regions may depend on various factors, not only location in the north. If we compare the criteria of, let's say, northerness and mountainous, we can see that some criteria are similar, such as bioclimatic sovereignty, or the meteorological regime, or transport accessibility and remoteness. But there are also significant differences. For example, mountains are characterized by complexity of relief, increased risk of natural disasters, and so on. The next, please. Interestingly, in the mountains countries of Europe, living in the mountains gives the right to payments. Mountains must be characterized by a significant limitation of the possibility of using the land and significant increase in the cost of its cultivation due to climate and relief. But most importantly, urban area north of the 62nd parallel and some adjacent areas must be considered mountains. Yeah, here is a direct link between the north and the mountains at the institutional level. Next, please. So, as more than half of Russia's territory is occupied by mountains, but compared to the Arctic zone and the north, which are recognized, politically recognized, there is a special law. The mountains are not yet noticed by politicians. Mountain policy has not been formed. This is also due to the fact that there are fewer resources such as gas and oil in the mountains and so on. The next. Traditional altitude intervals adopted in Russian cartography highlight mountains well, but this result does not correspond to generally accepted world mountain models that take into account two parameters, slope and terrain roughness. The map above right, there is a world criteria of relief of mountains. The next, please. The uniqueness of the relief of Russia lies in the combination of pronounced actual subaltitudinal and submeridional ridges with massive highlands and vast high plateaus. This is clearly visible in the model obtained by fuzzy supervision of two parameters, topographic relief index and high about the level of the nearest river. The next, please. Mountains are found in the Fachov regions of Russia, but only some of them have mountain population. There is no population, for example, in the northern and eastern mountains. The Republic of Dagestan in the Caucasus has the largest mountain population. Every sixth mountain settlement in Russia is here. The next, please. What about mountain research? If you see mountain conferences are held regularly around the world, and even short-term changes in the concept and strategies are quite impressive. Those at a mountain conference in Perth in England in 2015, the main tasks of mountain research were reflect, evaluate, and synthesize progress in understanding global changes, refine and agree on steps for scientific cooperation and joint action in the context of global change, strengthen effective interdisciplinary and international cooperation of scientists, and so on and so on. That's very similar to Arctic region. Yeah. The next, please. Now, the main topics in mountain research in the international context cover various topics from climate change, disaster risk reduction, to, let's say, mountains and security, biodiversity, sustainable development, and so on and so on. Also, here I demonstrate the similarity with polar regions. The next, please. An important scientific task is to develop an assessment of the vulnerability and resilience. Here I would pay attention that the term of resilience is coming from the Arctic investigation a lot. So that is there are two diametrically different approaches here. In the first case, mountains are considered as a purely natural ecosystems, and in this case, vulnerability and resilience as natural ecological parameters. In the second case, mountains as extreme areas of human habitation. They are socio-ecological systems, and vulnerability and resilience are socio-ecological parameters. The next, please. Classical complex mountain research is close to polar. For example, the boundaries and areas of settlement are studied. On the right side, you can see pictures of the southernmost village in Russia, that is Kurort in Dagestan, in mountains, and the northernmost in the Dolgana-Nenets region on Taimyr. The next, please. The main natural determinants of the environment for human activity, both in the mountains and in the north, are the indicators characterizing the conditions for a particular type of nature management. Those sustainable yields of agricultural crops are limited by the sum of the active temperature in different regions in the world. So, for example, in the Caucasus, arable terrace can be found from 800 meters above the sea level to the 2,600 meter in the eastern Caucasus. The next, please. In common, this diagram reflects the scope of mountain study, integrating social and natural science with positivistic and constructivistic intersection to reach convergence over towards so-called montology, the mountain study. If at first integrated approaches within the framework Humboldt mountain science dominated, then later mountain research broke up into many directions. I think this is very similar to polar investigation. First of all, natural, ecological, geophysical, and then also involved social and so on. The next, please. The next. Yeah, thanks. Yeah, this one, yeah. So if you can say about peculiarity of mountain and also in polar research, they are unique laboratories for studying fast-moving changes. They provide rich experience in complex interdisciplinary research and the effectiveness of integrated approach in studying and responding to global problems like climate change, land cover dynamics, and so on, has been proven also in mountains and I think also in polar regions. Mountain research forms complex thinking and links with practice. In this sense, mountains and I think also polar region are like scene for interaction between science and praxis. The next, please. Mountains, like polar regions, play an important role in regulating the Earth's climate and the water cycle. Climate change has led to the degradation of glaciers in mountain permafrost, the transformation of the water regime of mountain rivers, and an increase in the risk of natural disasters. The next. In Russia, in my Institute of Geography, we monitor glaciers, creates and updates a catalog of glaciers in Russia based on satellite data. Next, please. But the mountain climate is a bit different from a polar one because there is rough mountains terrain, also altitude catena and gradients, and very few regular meteorological observation. But in the last case, it is similar to polar regions. The next. There is a high confidence that there are a lot of different hazards like catastrophic glaciers, movements, mud flows, avalanches, landslides, and so on. Next. So if you have a look at trends in the development of various mountain regions of Russia, we can see very different trends, also from abandonment to decrease. Yeah, there are first of all mountains of Siberia and the Far East. There is an increase in forest cover. Situation is different in the North Caucasus, where there is an increase in development. The next. So in details, you can see the decline of development in Ural mountains. The next. And on this example, we can see growth and development in the Caucasus with a sometimes in overpopulation and outmigration of population. The next. Yeah, and the next, please. So if we can, if we look at global changes, different mountain systems demonstrate different responses to climate change. Yeah, in some mountains, climate changes are rather positive. For example, forest growth. And climate-induced changes in the mountains led to instability of water supply and increasing the resilience and adaptive capacity on mountain communities and ecosystems to climate change based on coordinated data collection, monitoring, and knowledge sharing. The next. So now I come to the end, to the conclusion, but have 5 or more slides. I hope I am in time. What can we do? What do we record in mountains? This is a question also what very important for the Arctic. Yeah. First of all, degradation of the Nival glacial zone. Yeah. We have we record also disproportion in development and anthropogenic loads on nature, urbanization, for example, urbanization footfills in mountains and partly in high mountain recreational centers with a jungle of the corresponding problems. We have also modernization of the life of mountaineers. That's like also in polar regions. Yeah. What are the actions of politicians and stakeholders in this case? It's very interesting. We have also mountain agenda and the formation of mountain policy, but this is very slow. There are still no criteria for what to consider a mountain municipality and so on. The problems of the scientific community are as follows. The system of monitoring and risk management requires significant transformation, including in connection with the need to thicken the observation network. The next, please. We have different examples of international cooperations in mountain regions, like MAP6, Human Impact on Mountain Ecosystems. This organization has a long history. We have also mountain chapter. We have so-called Mountain Research Initiative. We have also different programs and projects. Also, we have International Mountain Partnership within UNO, and we have also Mountain Commission of the International Geographical Union. I represent also. The next. There are successful examples of regional mechanism for exchange of experience in the field of sustainable development and of mountain regions. First of all, I would mention ICIMOD, International Center for Integrated Mountain Development in Nepal. This is really well known and has a lot of projects and positive experience. Also, I would here mention Alpine Convention. It's very progressive and would be a very good example for knowledge transfer for other mountain regions like Caucasus. But also in the Caucasus, we have different networks like North Caucasian Scientific Cooperation, 10 years old. Yeah. The next, please. For example, very similar to polar thematic could be objectives and goals of the International Mountain Partnership, taking into account the experience and mistakes on the way to implementation similar projects in various fields, and also learning to overcome similar difficulties, or, for example, avoiding regional myopia when addressing the level of development, especially when carried away by economic tasks, while environmental and social consequences may be underestimated. The next, please. Yes, this is a very good example of a mountain research initiative as a global coordination network for research collaboration on mountains, and they have also so-called GeoMountains, the global network for information and observation. The next, please. Most important goals are here enhancing the resilience and adaptive capacity of mountain communities, or, for example, creation of inventories in the sense of general information, data creation, data portals creation, or also synthesize and transform wealth of often complex data into information and so-called knowledge that can be easily interpreted by decision makers and policy makers. The next. The next. Yeah. Next, please. Yeah, a very, very good example is so-called the global network of mountain observatories. It is not astronomical observatories, but observatories. They have very complex parameters from the natural to social. And the last slide, please. If we can see from this mountain experience compared with polar regions experience, it would be very important to speak about the need for a network, so-called the third pole. The overall objective could be to understand the general mechanisms and dynamics of mountain and polar natural and social ecological systems. And as most important objectives could be creating an international network of researchers in geophysical, climatic, biophysical, geoecological, and so on, in other fields of mountain and polar areas, to develop a transdisciplinary modeling framework for the third pole, to promote international transdisciplinary approach that link science with policy and practice. And I think at the end that this network could be like a catalyst for innovative technologies and synthesis for application in transborder projects. Third pole could be a very big macro regional network within BRICS country. And first of all, also Russia, China, the country of the Central Asia, but not only. Yeah, I think this is the idea we should elaborate next year before we have our final. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Guna, for your excellent and very thoughtful presentation. I think that was a very good exercise of building bridges between the topics of mountains and topics of the Arctic and Antarctic. And that will serve us as a basis for further discussion and what's most important, further cooperation. So, of course, you had a wonderful presentation that gives birth to many questions, but let us wait till the end of our sequence of presentation to question and answer time. And now let me pass on the floor to Dr. Andrei Briksenkov. Dr. Briksenkov, Russia State Hydrometeorological University has been assigned by the Ministry of Science and Higher Education to be a coordinator of the new IPY preparations in Russia. What do you think about IPY 5? How is the university preparing for this important mission? What practical steps are being planned or envisaged as we are embarking on a trip to IPY 5? Dr. Andrei Briksenkov, you have the floor.
So, Anton, thank you very much. Dear colleagues, dear friends of Arctic, Antarctica, cryosphere. So, in international cooperation in the Arctic and Antarctic, the following trends are likely to be further developed: globalization, interdisciplinarity, and socialization. Okay, 1 minute presentation, okay. Okay. It's correct? Okay. So,
Yes,
So-
go ahead.
some problem with
We see it.
but
It's
I
okay.
can. Okay. So globalization means the involvement of an increasing number of non-polar states in Arctic research. By interdisciplinarity, we understand the growing need to organize comprehensive, consolidating efforts of representatives of social and natural science research in the Arctic. Socialization means further strengthening of the social vector, greater focus on these studies on the person and his needs. Promising forms of scientific cooperation can be strengthening the role of non-state structures in international polar cooperation, closer integration of scientific polar research and intellectual business services in the form of Arctic consulting for government agencies and business structures. The most important conditions of the Arctic sustainable development is cooperation of not only the Arctic Council member states, but also observers and all states interested in interaction. So I have problem with Can you help me for my presentation? I don't know if this is working.
Could you send it my Gmail? I will write in the message.
Yeah, please. So, the stronger the partnership, the stronger regional security will be. Russia stands for forming a broad international partnership in favor of the Arctic region sustainable development. Therefore, the Interpolus format is relevant. The term Interpolus means conducting scientific research in the Arctic at all poles of the Earth, including the third pole of the Himalayas, a mountain range of countries, including the participation of all interested countries. It's turned out that cooperation in the BRICS is closely linked to cooperation in the Arctic. Previously, the Arctic, Antarctica, and mountain range were almost considered separately. In fact, there's no global knowledge based on the common features, connections, and differences between these regions of the Earth, especially with regards to the geopolitical, socio-cultural, environmental, and legal dynamics of change. We propose to create an interpolar knowledge network, bringing together experts from different regions. So the form of cooperation, webinars and conferences, joint research within the framework of the International Scientific Center being created in Svalbard, joint expeditions, including on the North Pole platform. Our efforts are aimed at solving problems that go beyond national borders, which requires a higher level of cooperation and interaction. So creation a scientific council, preparation a joint final annual scientific report on the activities of the participation countries' contribution to the development of the ports. One of the key areas of strengthening international cooperation towards the 5th International Polar Year, 32-33, is the organization and holding of conferences and webinars on topical issues of climate, ecology, and sustainable development of the ports. These conferences not only create a platform for interaction between scientists and researchers from different countries, but also serve as an important forum for discussing critical issues such as climate change, environmental protection, and environmental safety. The topic of seminars and webinars held in preparation for the International Polar Year covered a wide range of issues, from climate change to socio-economic aspects of the life of the indigenous people of the North.
Dr. Briksenkov, I'm sorry. You can move your slides, move on, make them.
Impossible, it's a pity. I
Okay.
can put my
Okay.
slide.
Okay, move on.
So these events are based on continuity provisions of the comprehensive program of the Russian presidency of the Arctic Council 22-23, which was aimed on promoting with cooperation and integration international efforts in the field of polar research. The webinars also correspond to the main priorities sent out in the fundamental of Russia's state policy in the Arctic zone until 35. So the key topics of seminars and webinars include the climate change issues, environmental protection and environmental safety, development of international cooperation, problems of ecology and life in the indigenous peoples of the North, the development of science and technology, the development of the Arctic and coast. The first webinar on climate change was held on May 15, 24, and brought together participants from Russia and Norway. During this event, the researchers discussed global climate processes and their impact on the polar regions. Their participations note that change in the atmosphere, ocean, and glaciers have been shaping climate cycles for millennia. Understanding these processes is critically important to predict future changes and take appropriate measures. Scientists have conducted that the complex processes of climate change cannot be reduced only to anthropogenic factors, and thus it's necessary to take into account natural climatic fluctuations in order to create a more complete picture of current changes. The second webinar, held on July the 2nd, 24, focused on environmental protection with an emphasis on the problem of microplastics. Scientists from Switzerland and other countries discussed the extent of microplastic contamination and the lack of development of methods of its analysis. An important result of the webinars was the proposal for international cooperation in the field of joint research, including the exchange of experience and sampling methods. The participants proposed to conduct a joint expedition to analyze pollutions in the Arctic and Antarctica, which underlies the importance of coordination international scientific efforts in solving a common problem. So the Interpolus initiative is actively promoted through a series of webinars and roundtables, where priority areas for its implementation are discussed. So Russian-Chinese cooperation in climate change in the Arctic region, May 7 this year. The webinar focused on expanding scientific cooperation between Russia and China in the field of climate research, including monitoring the melting of glaciers and the impact of the marine ecosystems. The participants exchanging experience and proposed joint projects to study environmental changes. Ensuring the protection of the population and territories from natural and man-made emergencies. It was 20 July this year. The webinar discussed strategy for the protecting Arctic communities from the efforts of climate change and man-made threats, with an emphasis of sharing experience of protecting critical infrastructure. So roundtable on international partnership in polar regions, September this year. The participants of the roundtable discussed promising forms of development international cooperation in polar research, emphasizing the need to include representatives of indigenous people and youth in the process. Environmental protection and environmental safety in October this year. The webinar was devoted to discussing innovative solutions to the field of environmental safety of the Arctic and improving mechanisms for international cooperation. The participants reviewed examples of successful practices and technologies that can be implemented to improve the environmental situation in the polar region. And last week on November 14 in St. Petersburg, within the framework of the Arctic Scientific Dialogue Forum, we held a roundtable on the preparation and conduct of the International Polar Year. We invited Russian scientists, representatives of the CIS countries, and friendly countries. The roundtable was held in an atmosphere of understanding and interest. In this year, Russian State Hydrometeorological University being the coordinator of the preparation and holding of the International Polar Year from the Ministry of Science and Higher Education. So we prepared a concept note and an annual report of this topic. We should not close these doors and throw away this key. The Norwegian Prime Minister in a story says of the Arctic Council preparation also with Russia. And we fully agree with this statement. So we are open for cooperation with all countries. And we think that initiative to hold International Polar Year 3033, which reflects the traditions of integrated scientific research, can become the main core for scientific research in the next decade and for the future. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Brixinkov. So, back to our chairs. So, Dr. Alexander Shestakov, judging from your extensive experience of international Arctic cooperation, what are the key points we should pay special attention to in preparation to IPY5? What ecological aspects could become the highlights of the IPY activities? What is your reaction to what we have just heard from our colleagues? You have the floor.
Thank you, Ambassador Vasiliev, and thanks to all colleagues who spoke previously. I think it was a very interesting and extensive information on the history of international polar years before, as well as actually the lessons learned. And definitely if we are approaching the new IPY, and hopefully that will happen in 32, 33, almost exactly 25 years after the previous one, which I totally agree with Ambassador, provides a good opportunity for kind of a generational exchange and generational assessment of where we are and address all changes happened in the last 25 years. So in terms of environmental points, I think my colleagues mentioned it. In the last presentation, we heard about environmental elements. Also, in terms of previous IPYs, I think it was not very much in focus for the first three of them, but definitely appear in the agenda of the last International Polar Year, where environmental concerns connected also to climate change became an important element of considerations. Since that time, environmental issue became even more acute in the Arctic, and we can see the very significant changes, very much driven by the climate change in Arctic ecosystems, whether we are talking about terrestrial ecosystems or marine ecosystems, including, of course, the melting of sea ice, with changing the biodiversity. We can see many species from the south which are actually coming to the Arctic, even some kind of like almost anecdotes. Like for many, actually for centuries and probably thousands of years, the top predator in the Arctic was always polar bear. Not anymore. That's actually orca, who can eat polar bear. So it's totally kind of almost a nonsense for the Arctic, but it's happening. And definitely for the polar year 32, 33, the environmental agenda need to be a very serious one, addressing the climate change, addressing what may happen with invasive alien species. That invasive alien species is one of the major concerns for the loss of biodiversity globally, and specifically in the Arctic. The previous speakers were talking about increase in economic activity, and one of those economic activities clearly shipping. The Arctic is considered as a new global shipping transit route, whether we are talking about Northern Sea route or we are talking about so-called Northwest Passage, which an alternative route, and both, if the intensity of shipping will increase, will also bring more risk of invasive species coming into the Arctic. We talk a lot about cooperation. And of course, for many years, since '96, the Arctic Council was probably the key platform for cooperation in sustainable development, cooperation on environmental issues, cooperation in environmental security, cooperation on joint scientific work, as well as cooperation on emergencies and responses to different kind of potential emergencies in the Arctic. We all know that in the last 2 years, the cooperation under the Arctic Council was in a way frozen. But since, I should say, early 2024, we can see some attempts probably to restart the work of the Arctic Council and to restart the work of its working groups. And I like to say a few words about a particular working group related to environment, the conservation of Arctic fauna and flora, CAF. CAF is working currently on its new program of work, which is supposed to be actually not the program of work on biodiversity just for the working group CAF, but it will be actions for Arctic biodiversity for the entire Arctic Council. And the plan is to adopt this plan in the upcoming ministerial meeting in May 25, and the plan will cover 10 years. So that will be until 2035 or 2036, means actually covering the period of the 5th IPY. So from this perspective, that will be the 5th IPY will be perfectly fit in time to assess the preliminary results of this 10-year Arctic Council biodiversity program. And we believe that a substantial section, a substantial element of IPY related to biodiversity, but maybe even more in more general to environmental issues, again, covering the work of the CAF program of the Arctic Council, but also PAIM, protection of Arctic marine environment, as well as a very important work of the Sustainable Development Working Group of the Arctic Council, as I think all speakers speaking before me, they all address social issues and issues related to the people of the Arctic, whether we are talking about indigenous peoples or we are talking about other local communities inhabiting the Arctic. We have over 4 million people there. And many of them, and in particular indigenous peoples and their communities, are very much dependent on biodiversity, on marine biodiversity, on terrestrial biodiversity, and those linkages, from our perspective, need to be covered by IPY as well, be a very significant additional input to maybe a more classical ways of discussing different kind of geophysical parameters or climatic parameters, meteorology, etc. And we can see a very substantial elements of international interest. I like to talk about maybe a bit more global process rather than the Arctic. For example, Convention on Biological Diversity. The convention adopted a global biodiversity program, global biodiversity framework, which addresses many issues covered. For example, Convention on Biological Diversity has a special program on mountain biodiversity. And we heard from Dr. Gunia a very substantial presentation on interlinkages between the Arctic issues and mountain issues. As well as we know that number of countries, including our colleagues from India, from Nepal, from China, they really believe in the third pole. And the third pole need to be fully integrated in the upcoming IPY. I also totally agree with you, Ambassador, in terms that speaking about the fifth IPY, 8 or 9 years in advance, is actually a right thing to do. Because if we like to be well prepared, if we like to mobilize global community to be part of it, and we also know that in the last 25 years, even compared to the early 2000s, the number of countries interested in the Arctic and other polar regions, whether we are talking about Antarctic or the third pole as mountains, we have way much more countries engaged. We have a new generation of explorers, including coming from countries like, for example, Brazil or South Africa or Chile, etc., who actually have a very significant knowledge on the polar issues, and they need to be fully engaged. At the same time, I also totally agree with Ambassador Vasilyev in terms of bringing them at the early stage that overall Arctic states are the first who are running the polar agenda, specifically for the Arctic, but it doesn't mean that we are not listening to others and we are not inviting others. Everybody needs to be on the stage together, and actually bearing in mind that whether we are talking about Arctic, Antarctic, or high mountains, those areas are very difficult to access, are extremely expensive to explore, are extremely expensive to bring there different kind of equipment and organize expeditions and research. So if we can combine efforts of different countries, different communities, different scientists, including young career scientists, that will be a very important element. And several presentations in this pavilion also deal with engagement of youth. I mean, to be fair and honest, if we even talking about ourselves, in another 8 years, we probably will be very close to be on retirement. But we hope very much that those young guys who are actually around, and our pavilion is sitting right in front of the pavilion on youth and children. And the future of the poles is in their hands. Our task is in the next coming 7-8 years to help them to come to the podium of the polar discussions and take the torch from the other generation. And that's also will be probably a very good way for IPY to provide for this intergenerational transition to the new stage and new era of polar research, polar years. And maybe the last point, coming back to the idea that polar year is fantastic, but polar decade is probably even better. And if polar year before was mostly initiatives of scientists from different scientific institutions and international scientific organizations, thinking seriously about UN decade on polar issues, which will include Arctic, Antarctic, mountains, but also very much will engage marine science and marine research. That will be very well fitting into the UN agenda. And bearing in mind that more and more countries are engaged into polar research, that will be really fair that we are talking about the UN decade, engaging majority of UN members into this process, bringing their experiences, their science, their equipment, their logistics, and their passion to better understand polar regions, as we all depend on polar regions in many ways, whether we are talking about climate, and it was actually raised here many times, But if we are thinking about food security, majority of our fish resources coming from polar regions, whether we are talking about Arctic or Antarctic, probably 6 or 7 major fisheries out of 10 are from polar regions. So that's not only climate, it's biodiversity, it's biological resources, and we don't know yet much about the mineral resources on the shelf of the polar regions. So very much the future of the humanity. So that's definitely will deserve a serious thinking and initiative from polar states to come to UN and request the UN decade for polar science, but also for polar research, polar development, and recognition of those people living in all 3 poles, whether we are talking about research stations in Antarctic or 4 million people in the Arctic, or I think Dr. Gunia told us about very substantial population, up to 15% of the total population living in mountains. So I will stop here, and if any further questions, we'll be happy to respond. Thank you, Ambassador.
Thank you very much, Dr. Alexander Shostakov. There's plenty of nice thoughts, interesting thoughts in your presentation. And one of the very, I think, fruitful ideas in what you proposed, I've started thinking about that, was about interlink between international polar years and probable next international polar decade. Maybe, I'm thinking out loud, maybe we can empower the IPY5 with one of the tasks, and the task could be working out the mandate for international polar decade right after, because that was the again, the success of IPY4 was so vivid, so huge, that we started talking about international polar decade right away. And you've just heard, we just heard from Yuri Sychov that the preparations have started for international polar years, polar decade already. Nevertheless, this didn't materialize. So we can learn a lesson and start well in advance thinking about that. Thank you. There are many things to think about, judging from you, from what you've just said. We have a couple of minutes for question and answer time. May I ask Dr. Gunia? I'm tempted to ask if you're here. Dr.
Yes.
Gunia, Dr. Gunia, thank you very much once again for your very thoughtful presentation. I have a question, a very general one. When we are preparing for IPY, we are thinking about synergy between polar research of the polar regions, traditional polar regions from such as Arctic and Antarctic and the third pole. So there's a movement from the Arctic and Antarctic towards the mountainous region. I wonder, you are an expert on mountology. Is there a reciprocal movement coming from those who are doing mountain science to those who are doing the Arctic and Antarctic science? So do we have a kind of movement towards each other, or at this stage it's only movement from Arctic and Antarctic to the polar region? What's your feeling, and what could be the future of this process when we shall mind everything together? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. Yeah, for the question. I think the problem lays in the interdisciplinary research. If we are researching the problem like climate, there is no border on the planet. We should research it. Also, there are some evidence, climatologists, also ecologists, they are thinking about linking the problem of different species, for example, different limitation of living in the mountains or in polar regions, or about the atmospherical cycle or hydrological cycle, and so on and so on. There are some links also already built, I think, but on a new step, we are approaching this event. I think we should think not only in the case of research, not only in the sense of research. There are a lot of problems like networking in the collecting of climatic data and so on. We should think also about our conceptual basis. And I totally agree with Dr. Shestakov that the main problem, both Arctics and mountains, cannot be limited, for example, to climate. It is really a complex of problems, and one way or another connected with man. Economic progress and trends can be at the center, and that in this case we should then monitor these different type of areas, limiting with security and people living in the north or in the high mountains. And so in a conclusion, I would say there are some trends, some evidences that polar researcher and mountain researcher, they are already linking. But we should maybe help to understand each other, maybe also organize conferences, roundtables, and so on, to speak a little bit about conceptions. And very important about the conception linking these natural or ecological and socio-economical or maybe also political problems. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I have a question to Dr. Briksenkov and Dr. Sychov. So what in your mind should be the sequence of preparational steps to IPY5? So just 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. What's next? We still have 7 years ahead. So now we've started discussing. So of course we shall keep on discussing that. But what should be more practical, in the practical point of view, to be done in the way we prepare? So nobody is against. I think everybody is in favor. So if we get down to the ground, what should be done to prepare ourselves?
Okay, maybe me first. Okay, so I think that what we should do as soon as we can, we need to rise the discussion up to the level maybe of WMO, and as you mentioned, United Nations or International Scientific Council and United Nations. So we need a wide discussion because we have a lot of problems first of the program. We need the program committee. We need to think. It's usually a lot of problems because we need to synchronize the measurements, the quality of data, the measurements base. So if we include the mountain regions, so we extend the amount of data. So the data policy is one very important thing. As you remember, in IPY4, all the data that was obtained at the IPY programs were distributed between the participant free of charge to everybody. So it was very important that each participant of the IPY program can use all data, every data that was obtained during the research part. Interesting idea to include maybe the socio-economic part to the IPY program. It's not easy because we are more agreed with content of the research of the natural sciences. on the biology also. But what about the socioeconomic? There's a lot of different opinions, and it will be maybe not too easy to adjust to all these opinions to each other. But we can try. But anyway, the first necessary step is move from the discussions as ours to the level of the international level, trying to find the way for the general program, for the idea of decade. It's very important because the IPY naturally it's a snapshot of the current situation in the all polar region. Yes, but especially in climatology, we need to see the process and development, and the decade will help. Unfortunately, it was not happening in the previous IPY. Possibly it will happen now. It will be very good for everybody. That is. Thank you.
Okay. And also some words. Now, currently, the climate on Earth is changing, as we know, maybe changing naturally. But the West countries has proposed a Green New Deal plan to combat climate change. And green ecology is still popular in the West. The global climate agenda promoted by the United States and Europe and some other countries doesn't take into account natural interests and ignores approach of development of energy and economic landscape as a whole, both in Russia and most countries. So BRICS countries, maybe friendly countries, will be able to resist pushing United States and other countries the green agenda, which reflects, first of all, the economic benefits and interests of Western states. It should be also understood that the ideology of this agenda is based on assumptions without a fundamental study of processes of global thematic. So the International Polar Year maybe help us in this problem. Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much. And I think that getting down to the ground, I think the International Polar Year should first of all serve the interests of the people who live in the poles, both in the north and in the south and in the mountains. And that is also very important. Just the last 2 minutes we have, Alexander Shestakov, just think about, we just started discussing IPY preparation at this COP. There will be new COPs. What is your vision? What can we discuss at the next COP? At the next COP, next year in Brazil, basing on what we just started doing now?
I think that next year on the 30th kind of anniversary COP, even having it in Brazil, and Brazil, by the way, is a country which has a significant interest now to polar research, both on the north and south, down south. I think that we need to go the direction you, Ambassador, put in front of us. For example, at this particular meeting, we have 2 pavilions. One, the Arctic, another one, cryosphere. And we have people in both pavilions actually dealing with the polar issues. I hope that in Brazil, we will have a joint session specifically devoted to IPY in line with what Dr. Sychov said, moving towards practical steps. Basically thinking about the international committee or international steering committee, which can start actually the discussion on practicalities of IPY. In particular, what we like to include. And as we discussed already here, even the issue of socioeconomic component of it, whether it's really good to be included, what particular elements related to climate change, and we know that climate change has numerous dimensions. So what are those dimensions to be included into YPY? So if we can actually come next year to bring efforts of different countries and of also this climate community together to think how we can design it and make first steps next year, at least the first design how it may look like together. Because first of all, I think cooperation and working together is super important for the success of YPY. That will be a good move forward. Thank you.
Excellent. Yes, Mr.
Yeah, thank you. This is Paul Foose from Alaska. And I just wonder, in your deliberations, what part actual policy considerations would take place? I mean, mostly what we've talked about here is scientific research, data collection, but what does it mean and how do we apply it? And if we're going to do it for the benefit of the people who live there, you know, what does it mean for policy? And we don't want policy and politics to drive the scientists. We want you to do pure scientific work. On the other hand, how do you apply it and what does it mean? And you get a lot more support from the public if you say it's not just scientists talking to each other. We're doing something that actually means something to somebody. And, you know, I think that should be an important component that you might consider, that we might talk about next year.
Thank you very much, Mr. Fuchs. I think that should be a question which we will. It's a big question. We can speak hours on that, but I think let me just finish here and take your questions to the next COP and to the next meetings and discussions of that. With that, I'd like to thank our distinguished panelists for their wonderful presentations, for their wonderful answers, and I ask them to be prepared for next COPs, for next meetings. And I am really very happy with the outcome of our discussion. And I think that in a way that was a step, maybe a little step, but still a step towards preparation of a good and effective IPY5. Thank you very much.